Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Our scripture reading for today is from Jonah, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
If this is your first time to be worshiping with us, we've spent this entire fall kind of moving through the Old Testament. And a few weeks ago, I was preaching on Samuel and Eli. And I kind of characterized Eli, the priest, as a good man, but a failed parent. And Samuel, mentoring Samuel, he has kind of a shot at redemption. Anyway, that evening after that sermon, we gathered with Jamel and I went and joined our small group, which is composed mostly of parents of high school students. And it was funny because I thought I preached on a whole lot of stuff in that particular service, but what everyone seemed to resonate with was that idea of Eli as a failed parent. And I was really amazed at how, just in that circle, how every single parent could resonate with the feeling of failure. And I was thankful for that group, which gave us kind of a place of security and trust where we could share some of those things that we struggle with. But I left small group that evening kind of thinking about, gosh, maybe this feeling of failure is universal. Maybe it's something a lot of people are struggling with, and maybe it's something I should be thinking and talking about as a pastor. And then Jonah appeared, and I thought, well, who better as an example of failure? And so but I was thinking about, again, that group of parents, and I thought, I wonder if other parents kind of feel like failures. And I was actually amazed when I went on the internet. I found out if you type in epic fail parenting, you get a lot of fun images to look at. I'm going to share some of them with you. So here's one. This couple posted that they went on a photo shoot, thought it'd be fun to swing their daughter between them, and whoops, she slipped right out. This one, a dad thought my child was thirsty on an airplane and he forgot to take into account turbulence. So you can kind of see the water ended up all over. This grandmother, I love this picture, trying to catch her grandson flying off the back of the ATV. This dad thought it'd be fun to show his daughter what great fun rope swings are. He just thought she could hold on by herself. Clearly, she could not. And I love this one from a mom. If you can't read at the bottom, she goes, this is like the art project the child did for Mother's Day. And she writes about her mom. She says, my mom likes to sit on the couch and text people, right? These are just some examples. I ended up kind of going down this rabbit hole of epic fails, and some of the ones that I found funniest were not parenting epic fails, but ones that had to do with design, where someone, a human being with thought and care chose something, and the end result came out far different from how they intended. So for instance, this Starbucks drive-through, like someone designed those signs to point directly at each other through the wall of the building. Whoever designed this bike path has clearly, I don't know if they really just want people to ramp off all of those hills. This is one that cracked me up. The Sara Lee truck that has low self-esteem. It doesn't like itself, right? And then this banner, this is where you have to pay attention to font, because it's supposed to be a positive message, but all you read is donate to help end children. And then this one just, it's the worst possible picture I think you could give for cremation services. I read this, I literally was crying in my desk as I saw some of these. And then, of course, the church is just as guilty. We make mistakes too. This church wanted to communicate the lovely message that Jesus cares. They just didn't. Jesus scares is what they came up with. Scary Jesus. You don't want to go to that church. And then I also, there's also plenty of epic fails that are just physical, like, the stuff that's on America's Funniest Home Videos. Like, this is why you don't sit on top of the railings. They tell you at theme parks don't to do that. This is why you wear safety gear when you're riding your bike. I have no idea how this guy is going to land this trick. It's not going to be pretty. And don't jump headfirst off the swing. I don't think that's going to go very well for this young lady. Oh, I know. Poor dog. If the 932 had produced the exact same reaction, Jayla told me after, she's like, I don't like that picture. But do you feel the same way about this guy, the hurdler? That's a pretty painful, epic fail. Anyways, that's enough. But it suffice to say, we human beings fail a lot. And sometimes we fail in epic, funny ways, and it's helpful sometimes, I think, to laugh at failure. The challenge is that it's not so helpful if it's our epic failures that are up on that screen, right? If someone took a picture of us in our worst, most painful moments, that'd be hard to laugh at. And I think failure presents a particular kind of pain. I think of it as a compound pain. Because there's not just the pain of the loss, which is hard enough, but there's a compound pain, because with that pain of loss also comes a sense of fault. Like, I'm suffering this pain because I screwed up. I did this, or I didn't do that, or I could have or should have, but for some reason didn't, and I'm an idiot, a moron, a screw up. I'm a failure. That's the pain of failure, is that we internalize it and make it our own. It becomes not just something that happens outside of us, but something that is true of us inside. And the thing is, as I said, every single one of us experiences failure. Life presents all kinds of arenas in which we can fail. We can fail as parents. We can fail as in our marriages. We can fail in our friendships with others. We can fail in business, we can fail at school, we can even fail sometimes in our faith when we fail to do the thing that we know we should do, or when we fail to trust in God and believe in Him. Lots of different, every single one of us at some point in our lives is going to end up face down like that hurdler. Like, we're going to screw up so badly and it hurts so bad. And what do we do in those moments of failure? I'm really thankful that there are people who've kind of helped us think through this. One of my favorite authors is a woman named Brene Brown. If you've never read Brene Brown or watched her TED Talks, she's amazing. She's a researcher who has done a lot of research around issues of shame and around issues of failure. This particular book, Rising Strong, Ashley shared it with me. It's kind of about when we experience loss or failure, how do we rise strong? And Rising Strong isn't about just forgetting and compartmentalizing the things that happen, but it's about integrating them into our hearts and our lives so that we can cultivate what she says, wholeheartedness. It's the process that teaches the most about what we are. And so when she kind of talks about shame, she kind of acknowledges that, there's a handful of different emotional reactions, or responses that we all have to shame. One possible response to failure is, sorry, I said to shame, but to failure. One of the possible responses to failure is just denial. Like, it didn't happen, or ignore it, or compartmentalize it in some part of our lives, some part of our minds, so that we don't have to think about it. We build a firewall between failure and our lives. And one of the easiest ways to practice denial is to pursue success. Like, I can cover up my failure with all these other achievements and accomplishments. It's almost like a misdirection, like how a magician does. Like, don't look at this failure, the mess I've made in my life here. Instead, look over here at all my pretty accolades, all the wonderful things I've done. And we just push failure further and further down. It goes unacknowledged and unaddressed in our lives. That's denial. Another possible response is blame, where we protect our own psyche by projecting our failures and mistakes onto others. Like, that wasn't my fault, it was so-and-so's fault, his fault, her fault, their fault, whatever. That's a way of protecting ourselves. And blame has the added benefit that we get to be victims and martyrs of other people's mistakes. We shield ourselves and maybe even feel self-righteous. Poor me. And then lastly, we get into what I said earlier, shame. And this is, I'll be honest, this is kind of my go-to emotion or response. And shame is that feeling of withdrawing from others. Like, just like I'm such a screw up, I'm just withdrawing. And it's different. Brene Brown distinguishes it from guilt. Guilt is the knowledge that I've messed up. Shame happens when we internalize that I'm a screw up, I'm always messing up, I'm a failure. It's an indictment of our basic existence, she says. And you have to be careful, she says, because shame shows up in so many places. I love this quote. She says, "It's always helpful to remember that whenever perfectionism is driving, shame is riding shotgun." Perfectionism is not healthy striving. It's not asking, how can I be my best self? Instead, it's asking, what will people think if they saw the real me? When looking at our own stories, she says, we can benefit from wondering, did something happen in this instance that left me feeling like my cover was blown, revealing that I'm really not what I want people to think I am? Did my pretend, please, perfect, perform, prove house of cards come tumbling down? I like how she put that phrase, my pretend, please, perfect, perform, prove house of cards. Did it come tumbling down? That's what failure is. It's when all of our house of cards comes tumbling down. I imagine every single one of us can locate some time in our lives when we've experienced that kind of failure. The good news that I want to offer you today is the Bible is also full of all of these kinds of epic fails. When you read through the Bible, with the exception of Jesus, you don't find anyone who lived a perfect life. It's just doesn't exist, right? Like, even the heroes of the Old Testament, Abraham, Moses, David, you go through and you name them, and every single one of them was deeply flawed. And the Bible doesn't hide or gloss over their mistakes. The Bible actually gives us a picture of flawed individuals living into the grace and story of God. It's as if the Bible wants us to know that failure is a part of life, that failure is a part of faith. And the Bible wants to kind of teach us to move through that. And so we get to the story of Jonah. Like, when you think about all the prophets of the Old Testament, I think Jonah has to rank towards the top as being an epic failure. I mean, when God's call comes to Jonah, he doesn't respond with a yes. Virtually every other prophet, even the ones who are given this hard messages of judgment, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, that it felt like a fire in their bones, they had no choice but to speak. They answered God's call. Not Jonah. When he got the call, what did he do? He ran the opposite way, as fast and as far as he could. This map kind of illustrates, I know Tracy kind of put this at her children's moment too, but just to get a sense of where Jonah was in Gath, and Nineveh's due east, and instead he ran south to Joppa and then got on a boat to go as far west as he possibly could, the opposite direction of where God had sent him to go. And he exhibited all those telltale signs of failure, the denial, the blame, the shame. He denied his call. He blamed God for all the bad things that happened to him. And shame, well, when the storm hit and the boat was threatening and the sailors were throwing all they could off the boat trying to save it, where was Jonah? Was he engaged in the fight? Was he helping out? No, he was hiding down in the bottom of the boat, afraid of being found out as a failure. Eventually, he came clean, right? Eventually, he came up and said, it's because of me that this is happening. He told them, I'm a prophet of the Lord Most High, Yahweh, and he told me to go this way, and I went that way. And the sailors feel like they have no choice, and so they take Jonah, and they throw him over the boat. And instantly, the sea stops. It's calm. The sailors are saved, except Jonah sinks deep down into the depths. And God sends a fish to swallow him up to keep him safe. And when I think of failure, I think it looks something like that. Like a big old fish that comes and swallows you up and pulls you down. Except in the story, I don't think that's really what the fish represents. Failure. It's not punishment for all the ways in which Jonah has run away and denied God. Instead, it's the instrument of God's salvation, the instrument of God's redemption. It's God's holding environment for Jonah. Now that phrase, holding environment, let me unpack that if you don't mind. Holding environment, that comes from a guy named Ron Heifetz. He's a professor at Harvard. He wrote a book, Leadership Without Easy Answers, where where I first encountered this idea. And so let me explain what Ron Heifetz means by it. He says leaders have a couple different functions, a couple different gifts. One thing that leaders do is they hold the anxieties of others. Whenever things are going wrong with our world, whenever things are chaotic, what do? We look to a leader, because the leader can hold those fears and hold those anxieties. They can project strength, confidence, and certainty for us. Another thing that leaders do is they demand our attention, but they also direct our attention to the things that we need to look at, right? And so Ron Heifetz puts those together and he says, that's what a holding environment is. A leader holds our fears and our anxieties so that he or she can direct our attention to the things that we need to pay attention to, so that we can make what he calls adaptive change, so that we can adapt to the reality that we're really facing. The example he gives in his book is of a doctor. He names her Dr. Parsons. And he tells the story of a couple that comes to Dr. Parsons wanting, the husband in the couple is having some discomfort, not sure what it is. They're a little, and he says, think about this couple entering into the doctor's office, the fears, the worries, the anxieties that they hold, and they give all those things to the doctor and say, hey, doc, fix this for us. And that's their expectation, is that the doctor's going to be able to fix it or give them definitive answers. And yet, Dr. Parsons, he says, this hypothetical story example he gives, as they begin to do further testing, Dr. Parsons realizes that the particular issue that this patient has is not easily fixed. It's not something that he or she, or that she in the story can magically change. He says at that point, Dr. Parsons has to shift her role with this couple, with this patient. She has to build what he calls a holding environment, in which she uses her authority not just to give answers, but also to raise and process difficult questions. And this doctor has to kind of walk a narrow tightrope with the patients in order to secure their trust, to hold on to the trust, to sustain their hope, and yet also not make false promises that would keep them from facing the reality and making the changes that they need to make. That's a holding environment. And a holding environment isn't just a tool that a doctor uses. It's anyone who's in leadership, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a pastor or a politician, it doesn't matter. Anytime someone's coming to you with their fears, their anxieties, even if it's just a friend, and when you get the chance to hold those fears and then help them face those fears together, that's a holding environment. The way he defines it is this way. He says, it's any relationship in which one party has the power to hold the attention of the other party to facilitate adaptive change. And that's the narrow line you walk. How to hold someone's fears and anxieties without taking on so much responsibility that they fail to face those things themselves. That's the temptation for a lot of us leaders, is to say, well, I can fix it, instead of helping people to face and make the change they need to make. I had the opportunity to spend a day with Dr. Heifetz among a group of pastors. There are 18 of us who got to spend the whole day with Dr. Heifetz, and we'd read this book together, and we got to ask him questions. And a lot of us had questions about this holding environment. What does it mean? How does it look like? How do you build it? And he said, well, let me give you an example from my personal life. This is not in the book. But he said he shared this example of a time when his teenage daughter came to him one Saturday morning in complete disarray. She was freaking out because the night before, she'd gone to a party with some friends. And there was some alcohol, some substances involved, and she ended up making some terrible, terrible choices. And she came to him freaking out because she didn't know what to do with these mistakes that she had just made. And he says, in that moment as a parent, I have to make some very quick decisions about how I'm going to respond. And I know in that moment I can't respond by freaking out with her, right? I need to hold this for her. And I can't yell at her about, what did you do this for? I can't compound the shame and the blame that she's already feeling. But at the same time, he said, I also had to fight the instinct I have as a parent to protect my daughter. To shield her from the consequences of all the choices. I can't overfunction in this moment and keep her from facing what she needs to face. He said, so what I needed in that moment was a holding environment. And so I told her I love her no matter what. I'm here no matter what. I'm going to face this with you no matter what. And I promise it's going to be okay. And then in that relationship of trust, he could direct her, help her to face the mistakes that she'd made, to own up to the things that she needed to own up to make the right choices about all the things that would come next, to help her to learn and grow from the experience. That's a holding environment. You get me? It's any time we're in a place where we hand over to someone, we allow someone to carry our fears and our failures so that we can face the reality we need to face. And it occurs to me that that's exactly what God gave Jonah in the belly of fish. He didn't just give him salvation, he gave him a holding environment for 3 days. Jonah had nowhere that he could run. He had no one that he could blame. He had to face the brokenness of his life, and he had to face and reckon with the mercy and grace of God. And then out of that holding environment, he wrote the prayer, the poem that Joyce read for us a moment ago. So let's just look briefly at it. What are the things that Jonah learned in the holding environment, in the belly of the fish? The first thing he learned is that God was not far away. He sings, he says that's what he thought at first when he was first thrown into the depths. He says, the waves crashed over. You hurled me into the sea. And as I sank down, I thought, I have been banished from your sight, and my eyes will never see your holy temple again. He was sure that God had given up on him. Remember, Jonah put as much distance between him and God as he could. And yet I find it ironic to some degree that he blamed God. You banished me from your sight, when he was the one who ran away. I don't know if you ever heard that old adage that goes, if you're feeling distant from God, guess who moved? Jonah moved. But here's the thing is, even though he moved, even though he was sinking in the depths, even though he was sure God had banished him, he discovered that God was with him even in the belly of the fish. He would eventually I find deep resonance between this story of Jonah and the words of Psalm 139 as the psalmist sings, "Where could I go from your presence, O God? Where can I flee from you? If I go up in the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." My point is that even in the belly, or maybe even especially in the belly, God was present with Jonah. And I would say the same thing to us, that even in our failures, and especially in our failures, God is present, God is near to us. And then the second thing that Jonah learned then, if God is with us, even in our failure, then failure does not have to define us. Again, that was kind of what Jonah was feeling as he was sinking down. He says, the waters closed in over me, the deep surrounded me, weeds were wrapped around my head. I sank down to the very bottom, to the foot of the mountains. I went down to the land where bars closed upon me forever. Just listen to the finality of the word forever. Jonah was sure this was it. This was his final moment. This was the defining, the period on his life. All he could see was failure. There was no way out. And then he remembered, he said, I remembered the Lord. And my prayer rose to the holy temple. And he said, you brought my life up out of the pit, O Lord my God. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. This is my story and this is my song. Not my failure, but God's grace, God's mercy, God's deliverance. And I will sing about that forever. We don't have to be defined by our failure. That's how we feel when we screw up. That's that part of shame that we take it inside and we let it define us. But God gives us the good news. We don't have to be defined by it. We can be defined instead by his grace and his mercy. And therefore, this is not the end of our story. This is the turning point. And then we finally get back to the last lesson that Jonah learned, which is the most important thing that happens next, or the most important thing that happens is whatever is going to happen next. We can't change the past. We can't change our failure. All we can do is respond to it and grow from it from this time forward. In all of our lives, we can't avoid failure as hard as we try. And I know, if you're anything like me, you try to avoid failure. It's painful, it hurts. But no matter how hard you try, you're going to fail. And the question is not, did you fail or not? The question is, how do we respond to our failure? Do we let it teach us? Do we grow from this point? Do we do the next right thing? And in Jonah's case, his song ends with the voice of thanksgiving, I will sacrifice to you, and what I have vowed, I will pay. He devotes his life, recommits his life to God. And once he's spit up on the land and the call comes again, what does Jonah do? He goes to Nineveh. I know he's not perfect. He's going to fall flat on his face again if you keep reading the book of Jonah. But his life is held completely by the grace and mercy of God. And so here's the question I have for you. As we kind of talk about failures, as we talk about Jonah's failure and laugh at others' epic failures, is there a failure that you carry? And maybe it's one that happened a long time ago in your life, and you've learned from it, and you've grown from it, and you've made peace with it, and that's wonderful. But maybe there's a failure that you still carry with you today. I know I have a few failures that I carry with me. And the good news I want you to hear is that even in those failures, you are held. You are held by a God who loves you, who is not done with you. You're held by a God who laid down the life of his Son for your redemption. I think that's why I resonated so much with Brené Brown's phrase that the prove it, perfect, my pretend, please, perfect, perform, prove house of cards. Because I think that's the way I tend to deal with my own failures, is I build a house of cards based on my abilities to pretend, prove, perfect. And as painful as failure is, it's in those moments, in the belly of the fish, when we have the opportunity to realize a life built on that house of cards is not a secure, it's not a good, it's not a lasting life. We have the opportunity to build our lives on a better foundation, on the rock of God's love, on the security of his grace, on the promise of his redemption, which was sealed for us in the life, death, and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ. And when that is the foundation of our lives, we don't have to be afraid. I think what I love most about Ron Heifetz's idea of holding environments is he writes that holding environments are based entirely on relationships of trust. Whether it's a doctor, whether it's a friend, whether it's a parent, it's trust that allows us to hand over our fears. It's trust that allows us to share our failures and vulnerabilities. It's trust that allows us to do those things. And here's my hope and my prayer for you. I hope and pray that you have people in your life that you will allow to hold your shame, your fear, your failure. I hope you have that in your life. But my even deeper hope is that you also have, that you would come to an awareness of not just friends who can do that for you, but you have our awareness of a God who is big enough to hold your failure and all of our failures, and yet can somehow write a better and truer story of redemption and grace, that we might be able to sing with Jonah, deliverance, hope, peace, and forgiveness. All those things belong to the Lord. To the glory of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Good morning. My name is John Ellagood, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Zionsville UMC. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to get to know you more and spend some time with you. If you'd like to know more about our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There, you'll find the many ministry opportunities we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all of our contact information is at the bottom of each web page. You can also connect with us via social media throughout your week for daily inspiration and community. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope that you have a wonderful week.